Unlikely person turns out to be exactly who the job requires. Sarah. Chen had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, she learned early that the most dangerous secrets were often hidden in plain sight. Her sharp eyes and quick thinking had earned her a scholarship to the military academy, where she excelled in strategy and tactical planning. By the age of 28, Sarah had become one of the most respected intelligence officers in her unit. Her colleagues often joked that she could spot a lie from across a crowded room, but they weren't really joking. Sarah's ability to read people and situations had saved lives, more times than anyone could count. The mission that would change everything started like any other Tuesday morning. Sarah sat in the briefing room, surrounded by familiar faces. Colonel Martinez stood at the front, pointing to a map of the disputed border region, where tensions had been rising for months. Enemy forces had been gathering intelligence on their operations, and several key informants had gone missing. "We have reason to believe there's a leak in our intelligence network," Colonel Martinez announced, his voice carrying the weight of serious concern. "Someone has been feeding information to the other side. We're going to set up a trap to catch them." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected something was wrong for weeks. Information that should have remained classified kept appearing in enemy communications. Operations that should have been secret were being anticipated and countered before they even began. The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would create false intelligence about a major operation and feed it through different channels. Each channel would receive slightly different details. When the enemy responded, they would know which channel had been compromised. Sarah was chosen to be part of the bait operation, carrying fake documents that would make her appear to be a high-value target as she prepared for the mission. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The other officers seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones when they thought she wasn't listening. Even her closest friend and partner, Lieutenant Davies, seemed distant and uncomfortable. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a remote mountain village, posing as a civilian researcher studying local wildlife. The fake documents in her backpack contained detailed information about a supposed military installation that didn't actually exist. Her job was to make contact with a local guide who would help her reach the fictional facility. The village was small and peaceful, with stone houses scattered along winding dirt roads. Children played in the dusty streets, while their mothers hung laundry on lines stretched between buildings. Sarah had been there for 2 days when everything went wrong. She was sitting in a small cafe, pretending to study her research notes, when she noticed the unusual activity. Men in civilian clothes were positioning themselves around the village. They moved with military precision, but they weren't her people. These were enemy operatives, and they seemed to know exactly where to find her. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She casually finished her coffee and walked toward the back of the cafe, where she had already identified an escape route. But as she reached the rear exit, she found 2 armed men waiting for her. They weren't pointing their weapons at her yet, but their message was clear. "Sarah Chen," one of them said in accented English. "You will come with us now." Her mind raced through possibilities. How had they found her so quickly? How did they know her real name when she was traveling under false papers? The trap was supposed to catch the leak in their intelligence network, but instead, it seemed like she had walked directly into an enemy operation as they escorted her to a waiting vehicle. Sarah realized the horrible truth. The leak wasn't just some minor informant selling secrets for money. Someone in her own unit, someone she trusted, had betrayed her. The fake mission had been designed not to catch a traitor, but to deliver her directly into enemy hands. The vehicle drove through winding mountain roads for what felt like hours. Sarah sat between 2 guards, her hands bound, but her mind still working. She memorized every turn, every landmark, every detail that might help her later. The mountains around them were rugged and unfamiliar, but she had studied maps of this region, extensively during her training. They arrived at a compound hidden in a valley between 2 peaks. It looked like an old mining facility that had been converted into some kind of military installation. Guard towers stood at each corner, and patrol boats moved back and forth around the perimeter. This wasn't a temporary base. It was a permanent operation that had been running for a long time. As they led her into the main building, Sarah caught glimpses of sophisticated communication equipment and detailed maps covering the walls. Charts showed patrol routes, supply lines, and strategic positions that could only have come from inside knowledge of her own military's operations. The scope of the betrayal was far worse than she had imagined. They placed her in a small, windowless room with concrete walls and a single metal chair. The door closed with a heavy click, and she could hear multiple locks engaging. For the first time since her capture, Sarah allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She was alone in enemy territory, with no backup coming because the people who should have been protecting her were the ones who had betrayed her. But Sarah Chen had not survived this long by giving up when things looked impossible. As she sat in that cold, dark room, she began to plan. Her captors thought they had won, thought they had broken the back of her intelligence network. They had celebrated too early. They didn't know that Sarah had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of situation, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives by underestimating her. The interrogation began 12 hours after Sarah's arrival at the compound. 2 men entered her cell, one carrying a folder thick with documents, the other holding a recording device. The first man introduced himself as Commander Volkov, speaking English with a slight accent that Sarah couldn't quite place. "Miss Chen, we know why you're here," Volkov said, settling into the chair across from her. "Your people sent you to die. They gave us your exact location, your cover story, even your backup escape routes. You've been abandoned." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her mind was working furiously. If they knew her escape routes, then someone had access to operational details that only a handful of people should have known. The betrayal went deeper than she had feared. "We also know about the false documents you carry," Volkov continued, opening the folder. "The fictional military installation, the made-up research project. Your commanders used you as bait, but not to catch us. They used you to clean house. You know, too much, and they needed you gone." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain calm. Volkov was trying to break her psychologically before extracting information. However, something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely lying about the betrayal. Over the next 3 days, the interrogations continued. Sarah gave them nothing useful, sticking to her cover story about wildlife research. But during the sessions, she learned valuable information about the compound and its operations. She counted guards, memorized shift changes, identified the locations of weapons storage and communication centers. On the 4th night, Sarah made her first real discovery. A guard had forgotten to properly secure the ventilation grate in her cell. Working quietly through the night, she managed to loosen it enough to peer into the air shaft. The ductwork was old but sturdy. She could see that it connected to other parts of the building. More importantly, she overheard conversations between guards. They spoke in their native language, but Sarah had studied enough linguistics to understand basic military terminology. What she learned chilled her blood. The compound wasn't just an outpost. It was the headquarters for a massive intelligence operation that had been running for over 5 years. The enemy had infiltrated multiple military and government agencies. They had sleeper agents, paid informants, and blackmail material on dozens of high-ranking officials. Sarah's own unit had been compromised for months, maybe years. Every mission, every operation, every secret had been known to the enemy before it even began. But the most shocking revelation came on the 6th day. While pretending to sleep, Sarah heard 2 officers discussing their next phase of operations. They mentioned names she recognized, locations of safe houses, and details about ongoing missions. Then one of them said something that made her blood run cold. "The woman knows more than she realizes," the officer said. "Her handler didn't just betray her location. He's been feeding us intelligence for 2 years. She's been our unwitting asset the entire time." Sarah's mind reeled as the implications hit her. Every successful mission she had completed, every piece of intelligence she had gathered, had been allowed to succeed because it served the enemy's larger purpose. They had been using her to feed false information back to her own side while gathering real intelligence. It's about military capabilities and strategies. Lieutenant Davies, her partner and closest friend, had been the traitor all along. He had access to everything she did, knew all her methods, and had been in position to manipulate her assignments. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. Someone she had trusted with her life had been selling her out from the very beginning. That night, Sarah began preparing for escape in earnest. Using techniques she had learned during survival training, she started loosening more ventilation screws and testing the stability of ceiling tiles. The compound was well guarded, but it had been designed to keep people out, not necessarily to keep determined prisoners in. She also began planning her revenge. Sarah had an excellent memory for details, and over the past week, she had memorized the faces, voices, and habits of everyone in the compound. She knew their schedules, their weaknesses, and their security protocols. More importantly, she had identified their communication systems and weapons. Storage areas. The compound's greatest strength was also its weakness. Because it was so isolated and well hidden, the guards had become complacent. They followed routines without variation, left doors unlocked during shift changes, and stored equipment carelessly. They thought Sarah was just another broken prisoner, defeated and helpless. During her 7th day of captivity, Sarah overheard a radio transmission that changed everything. The voice was familiar, speaking in coded language she recognized from her own training. Lieutenant Davies was reporting to the compound commander, providing updates on military operations and requesting new assignments for Sarah's former unit, but Sarah also heard something else in that transmission. Davies mentioned a weakness in the compound's security that even he didn't know she could exploit. There was a maintenance tunnel that connected the communication center to the weapons storage area, and it wasn't regularly patrolled because access required special tools that prisoners couldn't possibly obtain. Sarah smiled for the first time since her capture. Davies had unknowingly given her the final piece of information she needed. He had also revealed that her former unit was still operational, which meant not everyone had been compromised. Some of her people were still fighting, still trying to complete their mission, not knowing that their intelligence had been corrupted from within. That night, as the compound settled into its routine nighttime security pattern, Sarah began her escape. She had spent days preparing, and now everything depended on timing, stealth, and her ability to turn the enemy's own resources against them. The guards outside her cell were confident that she was just another defeated prisoner. They had no idea that Sarah Chen had spent the last week conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence, and preparing to show them exactly why her reputation as an unstoppable operative was well deserved. As she worked on the final ventilation screws, Sarah made herself a promise. She would escape. She would expose the traitors. She would make them pay for every life they had cost, every mission they had sabotaged, and every trust they had betrayed. The enemy had celebrated too early, and now they were about to learn what happened when you underestimated Sarah Chen. Sarah's escape began at exactly 2:15 in the morning. During the brief window when the night guards changed their patrol routes, she had timed their movements precisely over the past 3 days, noting that they took exactly 4 minutes to complete the transition between sectors. 4 minutes of reduced coverage was all she needed. The ventilation shaft was cramped and dusty, but Sarah moved through it with practiced silence. Years of training in tight spaces had prepared her for this moment. She navigated by memory, following the path she had mapped out during her reconnaissance. The shaft connected to a maintenance area where cleaning supplies were stored, and more importantly, where the guards kept spare equipment. Dropping down into the maintenance room, Sarah quickly gathered what she needed. A set of maintenance coveralls would help her blend in, if spotted. A small toolkit contained items that could be weaponized or used to access restricted areas. Most valuable of all was a security badge left on a hook by a careless custodian, which would give her access to several areas of the compound. Moving through the corridors required every stealth technique she had ever learned. Sarah kept to the shadows, timing her movements to avoid security cameras and patrol routes. The compound's layout was burned into her memory from the maps she had glimpsed during her interrogations, and she used service passages and emergency exits that the guards rarely monitored. Her first destination was the communication center. If she could access their systems, she could gather intelligence about the full scope of the enemy operation and, potentially, contact loyal elements of her own forces. The room was locked, but the security badge worked perfectly. Inside, she found banks of sophisticated equipment, monitoring communications across multiple frequencies. Sarah's training in electronic surveillance served her well. She quickly identified the main server and began downloading encrypted files onto a small storage device she had fashioned from components found in the maintenance room. The files contained operational details, agent identities, and communication logs that would expose the entire network of traitors and collaborators. But the real treasure was the communication logs between Lieutenant Davies and the compound. Sarah read message after message detailing how he had manipulated her assignments, fed false intelligence to their unit, and arranged for key personnel to be eliminated or compromised. The scope of his betrayal was staggering. He had been undermining operations for over 3 years. She also discovered something that made her blood boil with rage. Davies had been feeding the enemy information about her personal life, her psychological profile, and her tactical preferences. They had been studying her like a laboratory specimen, learning how to predict and counter her moves. Every mission she thought she had completed through skill and dedication had been orchestrated by people who knew exactly how she would respond. The communication center also revealed the compound's true purpose. It wasn't just an intelligence gathering facility. It was the command center for a massive operation designed to systematically destroy our country's military effectiveness from within. They had spent years placing agents, corrupting officials, and manipulating operations to weaken national security. Sarah downloaded everything she could carry, then moved to her next objective, the weapons storage area. She had identified its location during her reconnaissance, and the maintenance tunnel Davies had unknowingly revealed during his radio transmission provided the perfect access route. The tunnel was exactly where she expected it to be, hidden behind a false wall in the communications center. It was narrow and uncomfortable, but it led directly to a storage room adjacent to the main weapons facility. Sarah emerged into a space filled with cleaning supplies and electrical equipment, then used her stolen security badge to access the weapons storage itself. What she found exceeded her wildest expectations. The enemy had been stockpiling not just weapons, but equipment stolen from her own military. There were advanced communication devices, specialized ammunition, tactical gear, and even experimental prototypes that should have been secure in government facilities. The evidence of collaboration and theft was overwhelming. Sarah selected her equipment carefully. She chose weapons she was familiar with, focusing on reliability and versatility rather than maximum firepower. A compact assault rifle, multiple ammunition magazines, sidearm, tactical body armor, and an advanced communication device that could tap into multiple frequencies. She also took night vision equipment and explosive devices that could be useful for creating diversions or breaching obstacles. But Sarah's most important acquisition wasn't a weapon at all. Hidden among the stolen equipment was a military-grade encryption device that would allow her to communicate securely with loyal elements of her own forces. If she could get a message out, she could expose the traitors and coordinate a counterattack that would destroy the entire network. As she prepared to leave the weapons storage area, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside. A guard was conducting an unscheduled patrol, probably checking on something that had caught his attention. Sarah quickly concealed herself behind a stack of equipment crates and waited for him to pass. The guard paused outside the door, and Sarah heard him speaking into his radio. He was reporting a minor security anomaly, nothing serious. But it meant that security would be heightened for the rest of the night. Her window of opportunity was closing rapidly, moving quickly but carefully. Sarah made her way toward the compound's perimeter. She had identified a weakness in their security during her reconnaissance, a section of the outer fence that was poorly lit and covered by overlapping patrol routes. If she could reach it during the brief gap between patrols, she could escape into the surrounding mountains, but escape wasn't her only goal anymore. Sarah had gathered enough intelligence to expose the entire operation, enough weapons to defend herself, and enough motivation to make her betrayers pay for what they had done. She wasn't just escaping. She was positioning herself to launch a counterattack that would destroy them all. As she approached the perimeter fence, Sarah paused to look back at the compound. The guards still thought she was locked in her cell, a broken prisoner waiting for further interrogation. They had no idea that she had spent the night gathering everything she needed to turn their own resources against them. In a few hours, when they discovered her escape, panic would spread through the compound. But by then, it would be too late. Sarah Chen was no longer their prisoner. She was their worst nightmare, armed with their secrets, equipped with their weapons, and determined to make them pay for every betrayal. The enemy had celebrated her fall too early. Now they were about to learn what happened when they underestimated the deadliest operative they had ever encountered. The mountain wilderness beyond the compound was harsh and unforgiving. But Sarah had trained in similar terrain during her military service. She moved through the darkness with practiced efficiency, using natural cover and avoiding trails that might be monitored or trapped. Her stolen equipment was carefully distributed to maintain balance and mobility, while providing maximum tactical advantage. 3 hours after her escape, Sarah reached a rocky outcropping that provided both concealment and a commanding view of the valley below. From this position, she could observe the compound while remaining invisible to their search teams. She set up a temporary base camp in a natural cave formation that would shield her from both visual detection and thermal imaging. As dawn approached, Sarah watched through stolen night vision equipment as the compound erupted into chaos. Spotlights swept the surrounding area, patrol vehicles raced along access roads, and search teams deployed into the wilderness. But their search patterns revealed a critical weakness. They were looking for a desperate escapee, not a trained operative conducting a strategic withdrawal, using the encrypted communication device she had stolen. Sarah began scanning military frequencies for signs of loyal forces. What she heard confirmed her worst fears and her greatest hopes. Several of her former colleagues were discussing recent mission failures and security breaches. Their conversations indicated they had no idea about the scope of the infiltration. They were still trusting people who were actively working against them. More importantly, Sarah intercepted communications suggesting that a major operation was planned for the following week. Her former unit was being sent on what they believed was a critical mission, but based on the intelligence she had gathered, was clearly a trap designed to eliminate the remaining loyal personnel. Davies was orchestrating the destruction of everyone who might be able to expose his treachery. Sarah realized she had to act quickly. She couldn't simply escape and report what she had learned through normal channels, because those channels were compromised. Davies would intercept any official communication and either suppress it or use it to further manipulate the situation. She needed to find a way to contact trusted allies directly and coordinate a response that would expose the entire network. Using techniques learned during covert communication training, Sarah began crafting coded messages that could be transmitted over civilian frequencies. She identified 3 former colleagues who she was certain were loyal and who had the authority and resources to act on her intelligence. The messages would appear to be routine civilian communications, but they contained hidden information that would alert the expients to the danger. While waiting for responses to her coded transmissions, Sarah began planning her next moves. The compound below was heavily defended, but her week of observation had revealed its vulnerabilities. The guards had become overconfident and complacent, following predictable routines and leaving critical systems inadequately protected. The compound's greatest weakness was its dependence on centralized communication and command systems. If Sarah could disable or compromise those systems, she could blind the enemy operation and prevent them from coordinating their activities. More importantly, she could potentially turn their own communication network against them, feeding false information and creating confusion among their operatives. But attacking the compound directly would be suicide without support. Sarah needed to be strategic, using her knowledge and resources to maximum advantage while minimizing risk. She began developing a multi-phase plan that would systematically dismantle the enemy. Operation while exposing the traitors within her own organization. Phase 1 involved gathering additional intelligence and confirming the loyalty of potential allies. Sarah used her stolen equipment to monitor enemy communications and track their activities. She learned that the compound was expecting a high-level visit from senior operatives within the next few days, which would provide an opportunity to gather even more intelligence or potentially capture valuable prisoners. Phase 2 would involve selective strikes against the compound's infrastructure, designed to disrupt their operations without alerting them to the full scope of Sarah's capabilities. She would target communication relays, power systems, and transportation assets in ways that would appear to be random equipment, failures, or minor sabotage. Phase 3 was the most dangerous, a direct assault on the compound's command center during the high-level visit. If executed properly, Sarah could capture or eliminate key enemy leaders while seizing complete records of their operation. The intelligence gathered would provide irrefutable proof of the infiltration and allow loyal forces to clean house thoroughly. On her second day in the wilderness, Sarah received a response to one of her coded messages. Major Richardson, her former commanding officer, had recognized the hidden communication and was requesting a secure meeting. Richardson had been one of her most trusted mentors, and if anyone could help coordinate a response to the crisis, it would be him. The meeting location Richardson proposed was a remote cabin used for wilderness survival training. Located 2 days' travel through difficult mountain terrain, Sarah would have to move carefully to avoid enemy patrols while carrying her essential equipment. But the opportunity to contact loyal forces was worth the risk as she prepared for the journey. Sarah received disturbing intelligence from her ongoing monitoring of enemy communications. Davies was accelerating his timeline, apparently concerned that Sarah's escape might compromise the operation. He was pushing for the trap mission to be executed immediately, which would put her former colleagues in mortal danger within 48 hours. Sarah realized she was running out of time. She could either continue with her careful, methodical plan to expose the entire network, or she could take immediate action to save her colleagues from the trap. Both options carried enormous risks, but her military training had taught her that sometimes the greatest risk was in hesitation. That night, as she prepared to leave her mountain hideout, Sarah made her decision. She would split her approach, sending detailed intelligence about the trap to Richardson through encrypted channels while simultaneously preparing to strike at the compound during the planned high-level visit. It would require perfect timing and flawless execution, but it was the only way to save lives while exposing the truth. Looking down at the compound one last time before departing, Sarah felt a cold determination settle over her. The people below had betrayed everything she had sworn to protect. They had used her trust against her, manipulated her dedication to serve their enemies, and were now planning to murder her remaining colleagues. But they had made one critical mistake in their calculations. They had assumed that capturing and interrogating her would break her spirit and neutralize her as a threat. Instead, they had given her the time and opportunity to gather the intelligence and resources needed to destroy them completely. Sarah Chen was no longer just an escaped prisoner seeking revenge. She was a one-woman army with complete knowledge of enemy operations, state-of-the-art equipment, and an unshakable determination to protect her country and her remaining loyal colleagues. The enemy had celebrated her fall, but they were about to discover that she had emerged stronger and more dangerous than ever before. The journey to meet Major Richardson took Sarah through some of the most treacherous terrain in the region. She moved primarily at night, using her stolen night vision equipment to navigate rocky slopes and dense forest, while avoiding the search teams that continued to sweep the area. Every step had to be calculated to avoid leaving tracks or disturbing vegetation in ways that might betray her passage. On the first night of travel, Sarah encountered an enemy patrol using thermal imaging equipment to search for her heat signature. She had anticipated this possibility and used techniques learned during Arctic warfare training to mask her thermal output. By covering herself with reflective materials and utilizing natural cold spots in the terrain, she was able to move past the patrol undetected. The experience confirmed what Sarah had suspected. The enemy was taking her escape seriously and deploying significant resources to recapture her. This suggested they understood the value of the intelligence she had gathered and the threat she posed to their operation. It also meant that other search teams would be operating in the area, making her journey more dangerous, but also providing opportunities to gather additional intelligence. During the second day, while resting in a concealed position, Sarah monitored enemy communications and learned that Davies was indeed accelerating his plans. The trap mission had been moved up by 24 hours, and her former unit was being briefed on what they believed was an urgent intelligence-gathering operation. The mission briefing Davies was providing contained subtle alterations that would lead them directly into an ambush. Sarah immediately began transmitting detailed warnings through encrypted channels. Using the communication device she had stolen from the compound, she included specific information about the ambush location, enemy force strength, and Davies' role in the betrayal. But she wasn't certain the messages were getting through, as the enemy might be jamming certain frequencies or intercepting communications. That afternoon, Sarah reached the vicinity of the meeting location Richardson had specified. The wilderness training cabin was situated in a remote valley, accessible only by a narrow mountain trail that could easily be monitored or blocked. Sarah spent several hours observing the area through binoculars. Looking for signs of enemy surveillance or traps, Richardson arrived precisely on schedule, approaching the cabin alone as agreed. Sarah had known him for over 5 years and trusted his judgment completely. But the betrayal by Davies had made her cautious about trusting anyone, so she maintained overwatch on the meeting location for an additional hour before making contact. When Sarah finally revealed herself, Richardson's reaction confirmed that her messages had gotten through. He was visibly relieved to see her alive and immediately began sharing intelligence that confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the infiltration. Davies wasn't the only traitor. There were at least 3 other compromised officers in key positions. The trap mission is scheduled for tomorrow night, Richardson told her as they reviewed tactical maps inside the cabin. I've managed to delay it by 6 hours using administrative procedures, but I can't stop it entirely without arousing suspicion. Davies is watching everything closely. Sarah shared the intelligence she had gathered from the compound, including detailed information about the enemy's communication networks, operational procedures, and planned activities. Richardson was stunned by the scope of what she had uncovered, particularly the evidence showing how many operations had been compromised over the past several years. We need to coordinate a 2-pronged response, Sarah explained. Spreading out maps and operational diagrams she had memorized from the compound, you handle the immediate threat to our people, and I'll take care of the command structure that's orchestrating all of this. Richardson nodded grimly. I can discreetly redirect the mission and ensure our people avoid the ambush. But if we do that, Davies will know we're on to him. He'll either run or accelerate whatever endgame he's planning. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Sarah replied. When Davies realizes his trap has failed, he'll contact the compound for instructions. That communication will give me the window I need to strike at their leadership. They spent the next several hours planning the coordinated operation. Richardson would use his authority to modify the mission parameters in subtle ways that would protect the team while making it appear that the changes were routine administrative adjustments. Meanwhile, Sarah would return to the compound area and prepare to intercept the high-level meeting she had learned about from enemy communications. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution. Richardson would need to protect their people without alerting Davies to the fact that his betrayal had been discovered. Sarah would need to infiltrate the compound during a period of maximum security and capture, or eliminate enemy leadership, while gathering final proof of the infiltration network, as they prepared to separate. Richardson handed Sarah additional equipment he had brought, advanced communication, gear that would allow them to maintain contact during the operation, specialized ammunition for her weapons, and medical supplies that could be crucial if she was wounded during the assault. Sarah Richardson said as she prepared to leave the cabin, "You know, this is essentially a suicide mission. The compound will be heavily defended during the high-level visit. Even with all your skills and preparation, the odds of getting out alive are minimal." Sarah checked her weapons one final time and shouldered her equipment pack. "Maybe, but if I don't do this, Davies and his collaborators will continue destroying our organization from within. How many more operations will fail? How many more good people will die because we couldn't stop the leak?" Richardson understood. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize when a mission was necessary, regardless of the personal cost. "What do you need from me?" "Give me 12 hours after you redirect the mission," Sarah said. "Then make sure everyone knows exactly what Davies has done. Use the evidence I've provided to clean house completely. Don't let any of them escape to start this again somewhere else." As Sarah disappeared into the forest, Richardson felt a mixture of pride and sadness. He was proud to serve with someone who would risk everything to protect her colleagues and her country. But he was also saddened by the knowledge that he might never see her again. Sarah moved through the wilderness with renewed purpose. She was no longer just an escaped prisoner or a lone operative seeking revenge. She was the tip of the spear in a coordinated counterattack that would expose and destroy an enemy network that had been undermining national security for years. The compound was 2 days away, and the high-level meeting was scheduled for the following evening. Sarah had that much time to position herself, prepare her assault, and coordinate with Richardson's efforts to save their colleagues from Davies' trap. But as she traveled through the mountains, Sarah was already thinking beyond the immediate mission. The intelligence she had gathered revealed connections to other enemy operations, and links to foreign intelligence services, and evidence of corruption that reached high into government and military leadership. This was bigger than just Davies and the mountain compound. The enemy had celebrated her fall because they thought it would eliminate the one person capable of exposing their entire network. They were wrong. Sarah Chen wasn't just coming back from behind enemy lines. She was bringing with her the complete arsenal needed to destroy them all. Sarah arrived at her observation position overlooking the compound just as the sun began to set on the second day. The enemy facility was bustling with activity as security was heightened for the high-level meeting. Additional guards patrolled the perimeter, while vehicles arrived carrying what appeared to be senior officials from the intelligence network through her stolen and night vision equipment. Sarah counted at least 6 high-value targets entering the main building. These were the people who had been orchestrating the infiltration of her military organization. The ones responsible for years of compromised operations and the deaths of loyal operatives. Tonight, they would finally face justice. Sarah had spent the journey back memorizing every detail of her assault plan. She would strike during the meeting when all the targets were gathered in one location, but she needed to time her attack to coincide with Richardson's intervention in the trap mission. The coordination was critical. If Davies suspected the mission had been compromised before Sarah could strike, he might warn the compound leadership at precisely 9:30 that evening. Sarah received Richardson's coded signal, confirming that he had successfully redirected the mission and their colleagues were safe. The trap had been avoided, and Davies was presumably trying to contact the compound to report the failure. That communication would occur during the high-level meeting, creating confusion and distraction that Sarah could exploit, moving under cover of darkness. Sarah approached the compound through a route she had identified during her previous reconnaissance. The heightened security had actually worked in her favor by concentrating guards in predictable positions, leaving gaps in coverage that a skilled infiltrator could exploit. The first phase of her assault targeted the compound's communication systems, using explosives she had stolen during her escape. Sarah disabled the main communication relay and backup transmission equipment. The explosions were small and precisely placed to appear like equipment malfunctions rather than sabotage, buying her precious time before the enemy realized they were under attack. With external communications disrupted, Sarah moved toward the main building where the meeting was taking place. She had identified a maintenance access point that would allow her to enter the building undetected and position herself near the conference room. The stolen security badge would get her through internal checkpoints, while her knowledge of the building layout would guide her to the target location. Inside the building, Sarah could hear voices from the conference room as she moved through service corridors. The meeting was in full swing, with participants discussing operational security and expressing concern about her escape. What they didn't know was that their worst fears were about to be realized. Sarah positioned herself in an adjacent room and used surveillance equipment to observe the meeting through a ventilation grate. 6 senior operatives sat around a conference table, reviewing reports and planning future operations. Maps on the walls showed the scope of their network, with marked locations indicating compromised facilities and recruited assets across multiple countries. The intelligence value of what she was seeing was staggering. These weren't just enemy spies. They were the architects of a systematic campaign to undermine her nation's security infrastructure. Charts showed planned operations targeting government officials, military commanders, and intelligence personnel. This was warfare conducted through infiltration and manipulation, rather than direct military action. As Sarah prepared to strike, she heard Davy's voice coming through a communication device on the conference table. He was reporting the failure of the trap mission and expressing concern that Richardson might be suspicious. The enemy leaders were clearly agitated, discussing whether to abort ongoing operations or accelerate their timeline. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. The enemy leadership was gathered in one location, distracted by Davy's report and cut off from external communications. She had weapons, explosives, and complete tactical advantage. Most importantly, she had irrefutable evidence of their activities and the authority to act on behalf of national security. Sarah's assault began with flashbang grenades thrown through the ventilation system into the conference room. The disorienting explosions created chaos and confusion, allowing her to breach the room while the enemy operatives were still blinded and deafened. Her tactical training kicked in as she rapidly assessed threats and neutralized armed resistance. "Nobody moves," Sarah shouted, covering the room with her assault rifle while the smoke cleared. "You're all under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy against national security." The enemy operatives were experienced intelligence professionals, but they had been caught completely off guard. Several tried to reach for weapons or communication devices, but Sarah's positioning and superior firepower made resistance futile. Within minutes, she had the entire room under control. But Sarah's primary objective wasn't capture. It was intelligence gathering. While keeping the prisoners covered, she quickly photographed documents, downloaded files from computer systems, and gathered physical evidence that would prove the scope of the conspiracy. The information she collected would expose the entire network and provide leads for tracking down other cells as she worked. Sarah interrogated the captured operatives about the full extent of their infiltration. Under pressure, several of them revealed information about other compromised personnel, ongoing operations, and planned attacks. The intelligence they provided painted a picture of systematic subversion that was far worse than anyone had suspected. The most shocking revelation came when Sarah forced them to reveal the identity of their highest-placed asset within the government. The name they gave her was someone she recognized, senior official with access to the most sensitive national security information. The implications were staggering. Virtually every major policy decision over the past several years had been influenced by enemy intelligence. With her intelligence gathering complete, Sarah faced a critical decision. She could attempt to escape with her prisoners and evidence, or she could ensure that the compound and its resources were completely destroyed. The facility contained years of accumulated intelligence about government operations, military capabilities, and personnel files that could be devastating if it fell into other enemy hands. Sarah chose destruction. Using the explosives she had prepared, she began setting charges throughout the facility while keeping her prisoners under guard. The compound had served as the nerve center for enemy operations, and its destruction would cripple their ability to coordinate future activities. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility, Sarah realized that her presence had finally been detected. Guards were mobilizing to respond to the attack, and she was running out of time to complete the destruction and escape with her prisoners and evidence. The final phase of her mission was beginning, and it would test every skill she had developed during her years of training and service. Sarah Chen had infiltrated enemy territory, gathered crucial intelligence, and captured key enemy leaders. Now she had to fight her way out while ensuring that the evidence of their treachery reached the right people. The enemy had celebrated her fall, thinking they had eliminated their greatest threat. Instead, they had created their worst nightmare, a highly trained operative with complete knowledge of their operations and an unshakable determination to destroy them all. The compound erupted in chaos as guards rushed toward the main building, responding to the alarm systems that Sarah had triggered. But her tactical planning had anticipated this response, and she was already implementing the final phase of her escape plan. The explosives she had placed throughout the facility were set on timed detonators, giving her exactly 12 minutes to evacuate with her prisoners and evidence. Before the entire compound was destroyed, Sarah forced the captured enemy operatives to move quickly through the service corridor she had used to infiltrate the building. They were professionals who understood that resistance would be futile, but they also knew that cooperation was their only chance of survival. The facility around them was about to become a firestorm. Sarah was their only way out. Moving through the building under combat conditions tested every aspect of Sarah's training. She had to maintain control over multiple prisoners while navigating hostile territory and avoiding the guards, or searching for the source of the disturbance. Her knowledge of the building layout and security procedures, gained during her week of captivity, proved invaluable as she guided the group toward an emergency exit. The first explosion occurred just as they reached the building's perimeter. The communication center erupted in flames as Sarah's charges destroyed years of accumulated the compound's connections to other enemy facilities. The blast created enough confusion and distraction to cover their movement toward the vehicles. Parked outside the main building, Sarah commandeered a military transport vehicle, forcing one of the captured operatives to drive while she maintained security over the others. As they drove away from the compound, a series of secondary explosions lit up the night sky behind them. The weapons storage area had been destroyed, followed by the command center and administrative buildings. The mountain road leading away from the compound was treacherous, but Sarah had memorized every turn during her original journey to the facility. She directed the driver along routes that would avoid probable checkpoints while moving toward a predetermined rendezvous point where Richardson's forces would be waiting. During the drive, Sarah continued interrogating her prisoners, extracting information about other compromised personnel and ongoing operations. The intelligence they provided confirmed that the network was even more extensive than she had suspected, with tentacles reaching into government agencies, military commands, and civilian institutions. One of the captured operatives revealed that Davies had been recruited years earlier through a combination of financial incentives and blackmail. The enemy had gradually increased his responsibilities and access, turning him into one of their most valuable assets. But Davies was just one node in a much larger network that included judges, politicians, business leaders, and media figures. As they approached the rendezvous point, Sarah received a coded transmission from Richardson, confirming that the immediate threat to their colleagues had been neutralized. Davies had been arrested, along with 2 other confirmed traitors. A broader investigation was underway to identify additional compromised personnel. The evidence Sarah had gathered was being used to map out the entire network. The rendezvous occurred at a secure military, the facility where Richardson's team was waiting with additional security personnel and intelligence analysts. Sarah transferred her prisoners and evidence to proper custody, ensuring that the interrogations would continue under controlled conditions and that the intelligence would be properly analyzed and distributed. But Sarah's mission wasn't complete until she had provided a full debriefing on everything she had learned and experienced. Over the following 48 hours, she worked with intelligence analysts to piece together the complete picture of the enemy operation. The scope of the infiltration was staggering, but the intelligence she had gathered provided the roadmap needed to dismantle it systematically. The destroyed compound had been the nerve center of the enemy network, coordinating activities across multiple countries and managing assets embedded in various government and military organizations. Its destruction had effectively blinded the network and disrupted communications between different cells, giving security services the opportunity to roll up the entire operation. Davies and his fellow traitors faced military tribunals for treason, espionage, and conspiracy. The evidence Sarah had gathered was overwhelming, leaving no doubt about their guilt or the extent of their betrayal. But perhaps more importantly, their interrogation led to the identification of dozens of other compromised individuals and the disruption of planned operations that could have caused catastrophic damage to national security. The investigation revealed that Sarah herself had been targeted for elimination not just because she was getting close to discovering the infiltration, but because her reputation and capabilities made her a threat to the entire network. The enemy had correctly identified her as someone who could single-handedly disrupt their operations if she ever learned the truth. In the months that followed, Sarah's actions led to one of the largest counterintelligence successes in her nation's history. The network she had exposed was systematically dismantled, with arrests and prosecutions occurring across multiple agencies and institutions. Foreign intelligence services lost assets they had spent years developing, and several planned operations designed to undermine national security were prevented. Sarah was awarded the highest decorations for her service. Though much of her story remained classified to protect ongoing operations and intelligence sources, publicly she was recognized for exceptional performance in counterintelligence operations. Privately, she was acknowledged as the operative who had single-handedly prevented what could have been a catastrophic compromise of national security. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome for Sarah was the restoration of trust within her unit and the broader intelligence community. The removal of traitors and compromised personnel allowed loyal operatives to work effectively without worrying about betrayal. Missions could be planned and executed with confidence that security would be maintained. Looking back on her experience, Sarah realized that her greatest strength hadn't been her tactical skills or her ability to gather intelligence. It had been her refusal to give up in the face of seemingly impossible odds. When everyone she trusted had betrayed her, when she was alone behind enemy lines with no support, she had found the determination to fight back and turn the situation to her advantage. The enemy forces had celebrated her fall because they thought they had eliminated their greatest threat. They had been correct about her potential to damage their operations, but they had completely underestimated her ability to survive, adapt, and strike back. Their celebration had been premature, and their overconfidence had led directly to their destruction. Sarah Chen had emerged from behind enemy lines with a complete arsenal, not just of weapons and equipment, but of intelligence, evidence, and determination. She had proven that even the most sophisticated enemy network could be defeated by a single operative with the skills, courage, and moral conviction to see the mission through to the end.